A vaccine scandal and a cavalier attitude towards COVID have many in Brazil calling for the president's removal for the second time this month. Protesters demanding the impeachment of Jair Bolsonaro. He's being investigated in the Senate over corruption allegations tied to the purchase of an Indian coronavirus vaccine. Bolsonaro's popularity has plunged to record lows, and polls show him losing to his main rival, leftist former President Lula Da Silva, in next year's election if both were to run. Guilherme Casarões is a professor of political science at the Getulio Vargas Foundation. He joins me now from Sao Paulo, and thanks for doing so, Professor. Where do you see these protests headed? Jair Bolsonaro was once so popular, but given his handling of COVID in Brazil, how vulnerable is he politically?
Well, he's pretty vulnerable right now. I'd say he's going through the most turbulent period of his period in office. So I think that at this point, what we have to focus on is, first of all, the number of deaths from the COVID-19 pandemic is really high in Brazil. We rank second in total number of deaths. We have millions of cases. So that's the first thing that might have taken his approval ratings down in the last few months. And then there's a second thing which relates to the economy. I mean, the Brazilian economy hasn't recovered as the economic team of the government has imagined in the first place. So we're talking about a perspective of 5% growth this year, but last year we went on a recession of -4%. So combined, this is not great news for the government.
Given the sorts of comments the president has made and his lack of seriousness with the pandemic, we've seen the protests. Just how angry are Brazilians, particularly those who've lost loved ones to the virus?
Well, I'd say Brazilians are very much revolted right now, not only because of the pandemic, but because they've spent pretty much 1.5 years without being able to go out on the streets to protest against the government, whereas Bolsonaro's supporters took the streets several times, even amid the pandemic. And Bolsonaro has stimulated most of those protests, pro-government protests, really. So there was a sensation fostered by Bolsonaro himself that he was the only politician who enjoyed popularity in the last 12 months or so. And that has proven wrong by the numerous people on the streets in the last few protests.
Yeah, and as he's become less and less popular, as the protests have grown in his handling of COVID and all of that, but he's famous for just ignoring criticism and even institutions. In the face of all this, has he, as a person, a personality, become more conciliatory, or has he gone the other way and hardened his attitudes?
Well, he's been sending mixed signals to Brazilians in general. So on the one hand, he seems to have tried to get closer to the establishment politicians, what we call centrão in Brazilian politics, which is pretty much a group of centrist parties that pretty much control Congress. So he's been sending very positive signals to these establishment politicians on the one hand, and that's part of his conciliation, part of his compromise. But on the other hand, especially his military ministers. He's got so many military as ministers and cabinet secretaries. So some of those ministers have been sending very clear signals that they are willing to stage a coup d'etat in case Bolsonaro is not elected next year. So that's also a trouble that we are facing right now.
That is a worry, and yes, you make the point. There is an election next year. I mean, what are his chances of re-election? Who might Lula Da Silva actually effectively challenge him? I've been reading that he's already calling the system corrupt ahead of time, fraudulent, and he's losing to Lula in the polls. But might he not even make it to the election with these calls for his impeachment?
There has been a lot of pressure, especially among the opposition, to impeach Bolsonaro. He has committed so many crimes of responsibility so far, but there's still no political environment for Bolsonaro to get impeached at this point. So I think that Bolsonaro will have to face elections in 2022. And what really calls my attention at this point is that he's following on President Trump's steps, and he's preemptively playing the electoral fraud card. And that's really troublesome because there's nothing wrong, apparently, there's nothing wrong with our election system. It has been an electronic elections ever since the 1990s, and it has been widely accepted as good, as efficient. So the fact that now he's casting some doubts on the electoral system, it really sends a terrible sign for Brazilians in general, because as suspicion grows with the electoral system, we might see something along the same lines that we saw in the United States on January 6th.
Yeah, extremely worrying, as you say. Guilherme Casarões, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.